Business owners, executives, and entrepreneurs, get your pen and paper ready and tune in Sundays at 1 p.m. for Evolution Strategies, Business Sustainability and Growth Simplified. You must evolve to meet the challenges of today's marketplace. This is the only show in the Philly metro area that walks you step by step through success factors that make or break your brand. Want some free advice? Call in Sundays at 1 p.m. to talk to your host, Carolyn Lighty, and a panel of experts for Evolution Strategies, Business Sustainability and Growth Simplified.
Good afternoon and welcome to the show. This is our last show of 2013. I'm Carolyn Lighty, your host. Last week, we examined the top 5 ignored financial trends for 2013 and gave you an idea of what we can look forward to from an economic standpoint in 2014. We also provided you with actionable tips and techniques for marketing your products and service in light of some of the economic challenges, but we also uncovered some opportunities that you could also take advantage of. So we talked to you about how to go after those as well. Too often we're too busy and too overwhelmed to consider the impact of economic indicators and various trends. And that's the beauty of services like those provided by Decon First, my guests who were on this show. They review the data, distill it down so that it's easy to understand in terms of how those factors impact your business, and then they provide you with recommendations that help you deal with the challenge or take advantage of the opportunity. It's the closest thing to having a crystal ball. So I encourage all of you to go to deconfirst.com and sign up for their monthly reports. Today we're going to be talking a little about some of the business resolutions you may want to consider as we enter 2014. Hopefully, our business resolutions will be easier to keep than our personal resolutions. To help me discuss today's topic is attorney John L. Williams of Inc. Now. Good afternoon, John.
Good afternoon, Carolyn.
Well, there you go with that really great voice again. So, it's raining, but you made it in anyway. I appreciate it.
Well, I'm honored to be here. Thank you so much for having me. And I think one thing you asked me to talk about initially is just a little background in terms of what we do for people and, my perspective on small business. Mm-hmm. And in particular, we have an incorporation service, which I've worked for the last 11 years. I'm also an attorney. So most of our business is focused on small businesses, individual entrepreneurs, partnerships, people that, have everything from a startup to a car wash to a car dealership, construction firms, consulting firms, this whole variety of sort of small businesses, may just be real estate investment. Mm-hmm. And we try to help them with the legalities, if you will, because they know their business, but we may help with some documentation to make sure they get started properly. And I think that's very important and sometimes overlooked.
Well, you're absolutely right. I think that I had an event back in June, and by a raise of hands, we had probably about 40 business owners at the event, and when we asked how many of them had incorporated or formed their companies legally, a lot of people will say, well, I have my own business. But, when you go to the next step and say, well, but is it a legally formed business? I can tell you that the majority of the people in the room were not legally formed businesses, and they kind of overlook the importance of that.
Yeah, and in fact, when I was in high school, I started a business, seal coating driveways, and we've ended up doing 500 driveways in Newcastle County. And it was quite an experience over 5 years. Wow. But we didn't incorporate at that point. I probably should have, but I didn't really know any better. And but I wanted to have the Inc. name on the business. And there's a way you can do that by filing a DBA ending in Inc., but it's still not incorporated. But what we would really recommend is that corporation, it provides some tax benefits, but it also provides liability protection, and that's the main thing. Mm-hmm. So if your business doesn't work out, the main thing is that, these creditors can't come after you personally. Mm-hmm. And so maybe that, you have a contract you've tried to perform on, you couldn't perform, and you get sued, that you don't want to have yourself personally liable because it may result in you having to declare a bankruptcy, whereas all you would have had to do is incorporate, for $300 or so, and then you have that liability protection.
Did you grow up in this area? Are you from here? Tell us a little bit more about who you are.
Okay. Yeah, no, I was born in Wilmington Hospital.
Were you? Okay.
And I think so the one they tore down, I saw it demolished at one point, became the Park Plaza. But no, I was born here and went to high school here. My father's an attorney. I worked with him. primarily he's a first tax attorney in Delaware, and he had a firm that he kind of built up, and on the side he had an incorporation service. And so what happened was he used to just use the incorporation service for his business clients, and and they would help them incorporate, get them his business clients who are clients of the firm started right. And then he realized he never marketed it for the first 20 years of the business, but then the internet came along. My brother was quite an internet marketing guru, so he got us online, and we basically have an e-commerce business, inknow.com. But yeah, in terms of my background, I went to school here, Tower Hill School, for pretty much my whole life, and then went to Williams College in Massachusetts, and then down to Emory Law School in Atlanta, and then came back here. I asked my dad, should I go back and get a master's in tax like you have from NYU? And he said, no, I'll teach you everything you need to know. So I call it homeschooling.
That's great. So then it's in your blood then. The whole legal field is kind of in your blood. But though your brother went the tech way, is that what he did? He went from...
Well, what happened, my brother was in college, and my dad said, Dave, we'll give you the BMW if you go to law school. And so he took the LSAT, but didn't really work out so well. So by the time I was ready to go to law school, that Beamer was probably 20 years old.
I was going to say, did you get was it the same BMW as the Carrot, or was there another one?
No, I didn't get one.
You didn't get a Carrot, or you didn't get a BMW?
I didn't get a BMW.
Just playing. That's great. Well, it sounds interesting. So let's talk a little bit about the law practice, and then we'll come back to Ink Now, because I want to talk to you about some of the things that the state is doing as it relates to encouraging businesses to incorporate in Delaware. So and there's so many law firms here. It's just amazing. So what differentiates your practice? What is the name of the practice, and what differentiates your practice from the others here in the area?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So we've mentioned Ink Now, and that's the incorporation service, but we also have a law firm, which is an A-rated law firm. In other words, there's Martindale Hubbell is a survey of different lawyers that they ask to basically rate their peers. And I think in part because my dad was the first tax attorney and helped to train about 19 other lawyers, and had a larger practice or mid-sized practice called Williams, Gordon & Martin for a number of years, that he developed quite a reputation. And a lot of the attorneys have since gone off and started their own firms. So it's something where he decided he didn't like managing attorneys. He wanted to practice law. And so we really like working with people directly. And, we're not ambitious in terms of growing the law practice to be some big firm, but we just like helping people, and that's how we basically are satisfied. In terms of the firm, he's, like I said, how we sort of differentiate ourselves, if you will, from the other firms in town. We have, a client focus. We're very reasonable. We don't have like minimum billing charges for clients, so that although we have a retainer, it's not like, some firms, the associates have to bill 2,000 hours a year or something, and we don't have that in part because we have this incorporation service that kind of helps support our business. So I look at the law practice as more of a sort of an intellectual, adventure, if you will, to sort of learn about people, try to help them solve their problems, and it's very kind of personal, and so we do everything from business contracts to negotiating leases to taking out loans, and then we even get into litigation. So I have cases going on now involving development of real estate and basically ownership challenges in business. They call it professional divorces. And so it's interesting that our perspective, coming from not just a transactional attorney that sits down and does wills and estate planning and things like that, which we also do, but also the litigation side, you get to see why things are the way they are and how to prevent problems. So our main objective is to prevent problems, but if you do get kind of pushed in a corner, we're also there for you as a litigator to either bring an action or defend an action for businesses, and that gives us a lot of perspective in terms of how to do planning to avoid those kind of problems.
Interesting. So if I, as a small business owner, certainly when I consult with startups especially, I'll talk to them about, having an attorney, on retainer, or at least certainly a close relationship, having a CPA firm. Those are, two of just very basic professional services that if you're wanting to be a viable business, you need to really have, because again, as a business owner, you have a passion for whatever the product or service is that you're marketing. But you certainly cannot be an expert when it comes to all of the accounting or the legal aspects of running that business.
Well, I'm glad you said that. I think the CPA is certainly a critical player in terms of trying to help you make sure you're, maximizing whatever tax deductions you're entitled to, and making sure from a tax standpoint you're set up properly. And they'll tend to be a little more intimately familiar with the books of your business. We don't get as involved. We'd like to have annual meetings with certain clients where we'll sit down with the accountant once a year, and the client together, and we'll go over planning for the year, make sure they've looked at various tax deductions that they're entitled to, and they've implemented anything they need to before the end of the year, the calendar year. And so that's something that we like to do, is work with these accountants. We also offer a little bit of a tax perspective. Like I said, my dad has that tax background. So that usually comes up in the context of starting a business, because there's threshold decisions you have to make, like such as choice of entity. You need to decide, am I going to be an LLC or am I going to be a corporation? And a lot of that decision comes down to taxation. With the LLC, you get every type of tax election you'd be entitled to with a corporation. You can still be an S Corp or a C Corp, which are two, like S, people think of as small business corporations. They really just flow through. It's a very simple tax structure. And then C Corps, people think as double taxation, a little more complicated. But there are still ways that you can run your business as a C Corp and basically get sometimes even more tax benefits, which I don't want to get into too many of the technicalities of for fear of turning off our audience. So,
and I think that those are important issues because, again, not understanding, everyone probably has heard of the different terminology, but not really knowing what that means for my business. And how do I decide, which of these is best for me? Or can I decide, do I really need someone else to help me make that decision?
And so a lot of what we see is people who, I call it the paralysis of analysis, where one of the reasons they're not incorporating is because they've done their homework, they've looked at the options, they've tried to read everything they can online, and there's just so many arrows pointing in different directions, they don't know where to start. Yeah. And so with people like that, usually if they don't know what type of company they're going to form, what we usually say is an LLC is the way to go. And the reason for that is it's very simple. If it's a one-person LLC, there's no tax return required. It just flows through your personal tax return. You get all the liability protection of a corporation. It's just super simple. There's no dance steps associated with it. You basically you don't have to have annual meetings and other things. And the one-member LLC is super simple. The other nice thing about a one-member LLC is you don't have a partner. And you may think, well, it's great to have a partner because they'll help me get started as I'm learning how to walk and run. There'll be someone else there to support me. And sometimes it does help in the startup phase, especially if you're on the same page. The concern that we run into is farther down the road where people go different directions. Somebody gets another job offer and they want to leave. They just have disagreements on how they're going to spend the money. And I say the only ship that doesn't float is a partnership.
I like that.
Yeah. So the LLC comes with a sort of premarital agreement, which if you after you form it with the state, you have the private internal documents, and that's something I can't stress enough is how important it is to have those internal documents in order. And in the LLC, it's really one document. It's called an operating agreement, and that is a partnership agreement between you and your business partner, and it sets forth what's going to happen in terms of how you split up the profits, the ownership, the control. Usually like to provisions in that say, hey, if someone goes and walks off, you can buy them out at sort of very low, reasonable price and payable over time. And there's other provisions that the LLC really lends itself to most small business owners.
And is it usually like a sole proprietorship or a smaller business that's going to generally benefit the most from an LLC rather than an S Corp or any other kind of incorporation?
So that's a good point. So I'm going to get just for 1 second into the sort of the tax side, but
I want to hear it.
Yeah, okay. We've got a little bit of time here to kill.
I want to go there.
So what I was going to say is you're absolutely right. So if you're a small business, let's say you plan on making less than $70,000 your first year or first few years, then the LLC is really the easiest way to go, and it passes through. You won't get a lot of the tax benefits from other types of companies. So. And then you say, well, what if my business goes from $70,000 to $700,000? Is an LLC still right for me? Well, two things. One is you can convert the LLC to a corporation, so the decision you make is not irreversible. It can be done later. It's not an expensive or complicated process to switch over. So if you make a mistake, you can fix it. Second thing is is from a tax standpoint, you can change your tax election. So an LLC starts out being a pass-through, which means that there's no tax form required for a single member LLC. It just goes on your personal tax return, your 1040. It's called the Schedule C. And with a multi-member LLC, it's also a very simple informational return. It's called a 1065. It's a form that basically you just report the income for the business, the expenses, and then each of the owners gets what's called a K1. In other words, if you're a 50-50 owner and the business makes $100,000, $50,000 of that goes on your tax return.
Gotcha.
So it's and it's very, very simple. With the S Corp, the story I want to tell you is about a vice presidential debate where John Edwards debated Cheney, and what happened was Cheney thought, well, I'll be so clever, I'll tell everyone that John Edwards is using his law practice, he's running it like an S Corp, and therefore paying less than he should into Medicaid, Social Security, because what you can do with an S Corp is you can split the income into two components. One is that pass-through, which is like salary, it's self-employment income.
Okay.
And the other component is a special type of dividend, which is not subject to those Social Security, Medicaid taxes. And so, like I said, when you start earning more, there's a way you can split that income if it's not a personal service company, and reduce your tax burden. And so I think the point that Cheney was trying to make to Edwards is you're not paying everything. You're basically laundering these taxes. But really, an S Corp is a way to do that. And you don't really get that advantage until you get a little bit bigger. Yeah. But that's one reason you'll see a lot of businesses around that say Inc. on the end or something. But what other people may not realize is even with an LLC, you can still make that S election. In other words, S is in Sam. It's like a little subsection of the IRS. It's very simple. You file this election within 75 days when you incorporate, or if you've already incorporated the previous year, it's within 75 days at the beginning of the next calendar year. And you can make that S election to basically reduce your tax burden as your business starts to grow. And so those are things that people may be reading up about. There's a lot of sort of overwhelming information. We've got a part on our website we call it Tax Tips that gets into explaining those details. 'Cause it's a lot to cover on a radio show.
It's interesting.
But I think go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say we're going to take a quick break, but when we come back, I want to talk a little bit more about whether or not the incorporating is more for tax benefit or is it more for liability protection. And it may be both, but we'll find out when we come back.
Welcome to Wilmington, Delaware. At Preservation Initiatives, we bring beautiful lofts to you. The recently renovated lofts at 400 Market Street are a must-see, a part of registered National Historic District. Featuring spacious floor plans, custom glass windows, solid surface countertops, stainless steel appliances, custom lighting, wood flooring, large closets, pocket doors, sunny interiors, high ceilings plus beautifully detailed trim molding. Enjoy the sights, sounds, and tastes of Market Street. Just a short walk from the Wilmington riverfront, featuring family-friendly places to enjoy, with plenty of restaurants, entertainment, and other small-town conveniences. Wilmington, Delaware, in the middle of it all. Reserve today. Preservation Initiatives, urban revitalization through historic preservation.
Preservation Initiatives is a wonderful, wonderful gem that we have here in the city of Wilmington. Don McGinley, its founder, has been developing historic properties since 1979. He's had properties in Boston, Miami, Philly, and now Wilmington. If you want to contact Preservation Initiatives in reference to any of the residential or commercial properties, please call them at 302-543-7565. That's 302-543-7565.
You can't. Do those magic words motivate you? Has anyone ever told you that you can't? You can't be an entrepreneur. You can't be a business owner. You don't have what it takes. How many successful businesses started without incorporating? I'm John Williams, the president of Inc. Now. For 39 years, Inc. Now has been incorporating first-time entrepreneurs just like you. Over 15,000 companies, from mom and pop businesses to worldwide enterprises. InkNow.com, based in Delaware, can have you incorporated in only a few minutes for $298. InkNow makes starting your LLC easy. Learn more about what InkNow can do for you. On the web, visit incnow.com. That's incnow.com. What do you have to lose? If you think you can't be an entrepreneur, then don't. I'm here to tell you, you can. Plant a seed. Ink Now. Dreamers wanted.
You're listening to WFAI 1510 AM. Welcome back to this week's edition of Evolution Strategies, Business Sustainability and Growth Simplified. If you're just joining us, get your pen and paper ready for more free advice from Carolyn Lighty and her guests.
Good afternoon and welcome back to this edition of Evolution Strategies. We are talking with attorney John L. Williams of Ink Now. And when we went to break, we said we were going to talk about whether or not incorporating is more for the benefit of avoiding liability, or what is it more for the tax breaks? So what do you think about that, John?
Thank you, Carolyn. Well, as you said, it is really both. The liability protection, I would say, is really unique with a corporation, or an LLC, to the extent you just imagine you're actually creating another person. That's in the eyes of the law what you're doing when you form an LLC or a corporation. You're literally creating another person, and it sounds like it doesn't make any sense in terms of what your experience is in life. You don't create a person by going on a website and filling out an order form and then submitting a certificate to the state.
Unless it's a virtual person, which I guess in this case.
Yeah. And so the interesting thing is, when you enter into business contracts on behalf of this new person, the person is liable, not you as the owner. Mm-hmm. So it's only if you either guarantee a loan or if you're out there doing something on behalf of the business and you personally hurt someone. Those are the types of situations where it's easier to go after you personally, because there's, you've agreed to accept liability or you personally went out there and hurt somebody. Mm-hmm. But in general, when you have a LLC, you may have people that work for you and they're driving a car and they get into an accident. And without an LLC, you're personally responsible for the victim of that accident and all their injuries. And it's a scary thought, And so what the government says is, well, we're going to allow you this right to create a special person because we want to encourage businesses, and we're going to provide you these protections under law, and we're going to actually make it reasonable because we want to encourage businesses. And so it's up to you to take advantage of that and basically form a business, because the government's allowed you to do this. They want businesses to go out and get started. And even court precedents. I mean, there's been court precedents over the years that just keep expanding this right of this person. And as much as we think it's so bizarre that the Supreme Court now says that, corporations are persons for the purpose of freedom of speech. They can make political contributions and things. That it seems counterintuitive, but really, what it does is as a business owner, it provides that protection, and the state where you're incorporated in really determines how much protection you're getting, because it's not a federal law, it's a state law. And so whatever state you happen to be in, and the state that you form the company with, that's the law that governs the business, the internal affairs of the business, the liability protection. And a lot of states have things like consumer advocates, which sometimes are a good thing. But other times when it comes to business law, they can get in the way of how much protection you'd otherwise be entitled to. But Delaware has a General Assembly who's very sort of friendly to the business community, friendly to the legal community, and they want to encourage as many businesses as possible to form here, because that's literally the reason we don't have a sales tax. They bring in so much money as a result of forming businesses here. There's more businesses than there are people in Delaware. There's over 1 million businesses in Delaware that are active, and I can tell you there aren't 1 million people. So unless the chickens are out there forming businesses with all the chickens in Delaware, no. But but
that's a good point, though. And I think it's valuable to talk a little bit more about the various types of liability, because if I'm a restaurant owner, if someone gets sick and decides to sue my business, then there's protections. Now, would an LLC versus an Inc. A corporation protect me differently in the event of me being sued by someone who got food poisoning or whatever?
Well, I'm really excited that you brought up this example because we actually talk about the restaurant example in our website.
Okay.
And they use that example as one where it's one thing to have one business. Let's say you're leasing space and you have and the business is really just the active business, doesn't really own assets. It's just this ongoing concern where it's, has employees and customers and everything else. But if you actually own the restaurant building as well as serving the food, what we usually say is you should set up two businesses. So you'd set up one to own the building and just own the dirt and the sticks and bricks, and then you lease it to another business that you set up to run the restaurant. So if there's a problem with the restaurant, the idea is that that person who gets sick,
the other entity is now protected from being sued. Interesting.
Yeah. So what you want to, and that's where all the assets are. A lot of times, the real estate has that. You don't want them to get your house as well as the business.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's interesting. I would have never, of course. Why would I think of that? But it's that's why we hire people like you to make sure we know what we're doing.
And anytime you have a business where you own the real estate, I would always say the real estate should be in a separate company from the active business.
Wow, very good. So you were saying it's both. It's a little bit of protection, in terms of liability issues, and then the tax benefit. And I wanted to talk a little bit more about that.
Well, we didn't really rehearse this ahead of time, but I feel like we're somehow
we are vibing. Here. Yes, we're vibing real good together here.
So
flows well.
What I would say is there are other reason to form two businesses for running a restaurant or something like that is because real estate's a passive investment. And so you're not out there. You may be changing, the toilet paper or something, but you're not doing anything. It's just kind of a passive investment. You're renting it out. And so two things. One is there isn't a lot of liability associated with that. Granted, someone could slip and fall on the steps, but usually have insurance that covers the type of liability. So usually I consider real estate kind of a cold asset. And so from a tax standpoint, like you're talking about, you're going to want that to be a pass-through. Because you can't have a passive asset that's run like an S corp, but for your restaurant, this is where you have sort of a two tax elections. This gets a little bit more sophisticated. So if you have your example where you own the restaurant and you run the restaurant, you for the property itself, the title is going to be held in LLC. It's going to be passed through. If it's owned by one person, there's no separate tax return. And then the active business, let's say you run it as an S corp. And that way you get even more tax advantages. So, and that's an example of something where, meeting with an accountant or an attorney, they could tell you this, where you wouldn't realize having two businesses could actually save you money. And also provide for more liability protection.
Wow, that's interesting. So what does a tax attorney actually do? What is the difference? We think about criminal attorneys, that's pretty easy. You see enough of it on television, or if you have the unfortunate need to have a criminal attorney for yourself, then you've seen what that looks like. But what does a tax attorney actually do?
That's a good question. So most tax attorneys, they don't file tax returns. That's the first thing I would say. We do help occasionally with, we do a lot of estate planning as well, estate settlements. If you need a will, usually in Delaware, you want to have a trust as well as a will. And I know it's a little outside the business scope, but usually if we're meeting with business owners, we also want to get into their estate planning and make sure that's in order so that for business continuity reasons, they've got things together from an estate planning perspective. And so there's ways that you can reduce taxes associated with your estate. And so a lot of tax planning is done for individuals, even if they're not wealthy individuals. Because, for example, in Delaware, if you don't have a trust and you die, all of your assets go through probate, and there's in Newcastle County a 1 3/4% probate fee, which is avoidable if you simply set up a trust and put your assets in trust. And you may say, well, that sounds really complicated. Trusts are actually easy, especially if you have minor children. That way they don't get all the assets when they turn 21. There's a whole number of other reasons. But that's one thing tax attorneys do a lot of is estate planning. They also work with small businesses on some of these elections I'm talking about, where they'll meet with the accountants and they'll discuss tax strategies. Because a lot of times accountants are very conservative, and there's different types of accountants. Some accountants just file returns, and they're not, and they won't make any suggestions. Whereas the tax attorney's job is really to provide more suggestions and try to get the accountant on board. So the accountant goes along and says, okay, this is a good strategy. I'm comfortable with this. But it could be pushing the line a little bit farther, whereas the accountant is, so conservative that, you may never get audited. And even the tax attorneys, basically, these types of strategies don't usually get audited because the only thing that we'd recommend are things that have been tested before.
Yeah, that makes sense. So when it comes to getting in trouble for whatever reason with the IRS, does your tax attorney get involved with that?
We do sometimes. Those aren't cases that we kind of seek out, I'll say.
Well, I would think it might be one of those long, drawn-out types of litigation. Yeah,
processes. Sometimes, depending on what the tax situation is, there may be ways to get penalties or interest waived. So usually the tax itself isn't really waivable. And so sometimes people declare bankruptcy, and then there's exceptions where you can get some things back, like, for example, medical expenses you paid. But there's the one that comes up most often in business, and this is something I really want to caution business owners on, is paying the tax that's basically withholding tax for your employees. The number one concern I see in businesses where they've made a major mistake is they have employees, they're collecting the withholding tax, but they're not paying it to the IRS. And there's no bigger mistake you can make in life than to do that, because what happens is that's not dischargeable in bankruptcy. Anyone that has signing authority on that account is personally responsible for that. And so if someone has a checking account and they have 3 people on it, even if it's your mom on it for convenience, she's personally responsible for that withholding tax. Wow. And so that's one thing I would say is you need to be really careful with withholding tax if you have employees on a business.
So, wow, that's really, really valuable information. What about, and I don't want to speak against any other similar services or competitors to Inc. now, but I know an awful lot of small business owners that have gone to LegalZoom and places like that. Can you speak in general terms about the differences between what you provide and what one of those other types of services provides?
Yeah, so one nice thing, we are managed by attorneys, and we don't do every state. And so we try to be specialists in the states where we do operate. Although we're not providing legal advice, we're not representing you as your attorney if we're just setting up a company through the incorporation service. But the difference is the documents we prepare are usually signature ready. So, for example, if you set up your business and you request an operating agreement from us, not only is it a form that we use with other professional clients, and not all operating agreements are created equal. So in theory, you're getting a more professional operating agreement that'll help you in different situations. And that's really what contracts are all about, anticipating the future and possible problems. A lot of incorporation services will use the same the same operating agreement for all 50 states and just do a name replace on it. And I think I've had clients through my law firm who have set up businesses with other incorporation services, and I won't name any, that have used these other operating agreements. And you get in a fight about interpretation of the contract and, what does it mean? Didn't contemplate things that should have contemplated. And so, it's something that people aren't really acutely aware of when they're setting up a business, because it's really hard to shop around and say, oh, is this operating agreement, how does that compare to this other company's operating agreement? You don't have a clue, and no one does, and there's no way you can really find that information out. So I guess one way, we have a lot of people we work with who have trusted us over the years. And, large businesses, even like you've heard of Pinterest, they incorporated through our service. And then some of the other services, they also either charge more on the front end. So in other words, to form your company, they charge more, or they charge more on the back end. In other words, once you form a company, it's not like going to a drugstore and you walk out and you have your product, and you never see them again. What it is it's really almost like a partnership, or it's an ongoing contractual relationship, because you have to have a registered agent. And if you're located in Delaware, and I think a lot of the listening audience is, you can be your own registered agent. There's reasons not to be your own registered agent. A registered agent's job is just to receive lawsuits if the company's sued, to receive state notices if there's like an annual report to file. But the advantage of using a business like ours, a commercial registered agent.
And will they file the notice, anything? Are they doing the filings as well, or are they just receiving notices about the filing?
So we will also help with the filings, and we'll answer questions about the filings. They're usually pretty simple, but the thing is, it's not something you're experienced with dealing with every day. And we have a friend of mine, got an award at Harvard for having the best PhD thesis. He's like a brain scientist. And he comes back to me every year. His corporation has to file its franchise tax. Okay. And there's literally 8 questions on the form. And he says, John, how do I do this? And so it's not that you're not smart and you can't figure this out. It's just something you're not used to doing.
Yes.
And so that's another job of the registered agent, is trying to make sure you're, you're able to, fill out the forms. And, some of this stuff is so intuitive for us, but for people that don't do it every day.
Exactly. And it's interesting. I was helping out a friend who has several businesses in Philadelphia, and he incorporated through that other company I mentioned, which I won't mention again. But because he wasn't familiar with that, he's passionate about his businesses. He has a fruit and produce store. He has a construction company, and he has a nonprofit that he just recently set up. And that's what this whole thing was all about, how to bring all these things together. And not really understanding, because that's not what he does, how to go about doing that the right way. And when I first met with him, I said, so is your nonprofit a 501c3? He thought he was a 501c3 based on his interaction with the other service. But it turns out that it wasn't completed. So therefore, I'm helping him now to complete that process, which again is not something that I do every day either. And I would much rather have somebody else take it over. But we are making headway. But what I'm saying all that to say is that, as a small business owner, you very rarely will understand, all the different forms, all the different questions, how to answer those questions, especially when it comes to filing for a 501c3. I mean, the questionnaire is like, I don't know, it took 2 hours to go through the questionnaire.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. I actually had a little note here. It says nonprofit church.
See, there
and
you
so
go.
I don't know if he was doing a church, but we have a certain audience here. And we
That's
do
good.
have, so the question comes up, if you're going to form a nonprofit, it's a little different. It's a very similar process, but if you try to do it yourself, what are sort of the pitfalls that you're going to run into? And you mentioned some like that long form with the IRS and failing to file that and not being qualified.
Right.
But one thing I would say at the outset is it starts with the state. There's a 2-step process to forming a nonprofit. One is it's the incorporation, and 2 is that IRS form, which is called a 1023 application. But the state form, if you look at the state's website, they've got a default form for a nonprofit non-stock corporation. But what's not on that default form are 3 paragraphs that the IRS requires in order to be a qualified 501c3 if it's going to be approved. And so if you use the form from the state's website, what you'll find out is when you submit the application to the IRS, they're going to send it back and say you need to amend your certificate of incorporation because it doesn't have these provisions on it. Whereas our service, if you form a nonprofit through us, we include those 3 paragraphs automatically. And so I don't know if every incorporation service does that, but that's something that we've had a lot of experience with. And then the other step is, like you say, that you form the company. We form the company. That's easy to do, at least for us. Then what about the IRS? And we can tell you, what the next step is, which is that application you're referring to. And it does get into a lot of sort of, how you plan on using the business and your financial projections and things.
Yes.
And are you going to accept cars as donations and all these other little bizarre things?
Yeah, a lot of different questions. And,
and that may be a little outside the scope of our service. We have, as attorneys, assisted people with that. But even then, we know people who are firms that specialize in that. And there's one out in California that does it for $600. So after you form the company, if you need a professional to help you with that, we could say, well, we'll help you, but we don't do this all the time. It's not a mill here that just does those forms. We can refer you to someone else that can basically be like a Carolyn, and sort of help walk you through those forms. And the advantage there is you get fewer red flags. Because when you're forming a nonprofit, like I said, you send it to the IRS, they get 120 days, it's called a suspense period, and then you hear back. And I'll tell you, it's not a rubber stamp. They'll often find little objections here and there, and you have to resubmit it. Sometimes they'll reject it outright if you say, oh, we're tied to a for-profit business, and this is the nonprofit arm, and those are things they hate. So you don't want to raise all those red flags with the IRS. But if you have someone who's done this before, they'll know those little secrets, and they'll save you time, they'll save you money, and it's something where it's nice to be self-sufficient, but sometimes paying a few extra bucks.
It's well worth it.
Yeah, basically, you get a lot of that back in return.
Now, and with a nonprofit, one of the things that a lot of people don't know, becoming a 501, setting up the nonprofit is, like you said, a piece of cake. That's not a big deal. But to get your 501c3 status, approved, that could take 9 months. Is that your experience, 6 to 9 months, because you have that initial period?
Okay.
And then,
so that's what I call the suspense period, where you send the application in, and then they get back to you, and they usually get back within about 90 days, although they have up to 4 months. And then there's the back and forth, like, oh, we don't like this, you got to supplement it, or you have to amend it. And that's where it starts getting dragged on.
That's why it gets, yeah.
So, but that is about right. And so what you do is, as long as you've applied for that 1023 within 18 months of when you've incorporated, then those contributions you've accepted before, from the time you incorporated on, they will be tax deductible to the donors. Whereas if you wait more than 18 months before you submit that application, it doesn't date back to the date of incorporation. Okay. And then if it doesn't go through, then you have to refund the donors. So if you've accepted donations, you really have to be careful.
Yeah, very interesting. Well, we're going to take another quick break, and then when we come back, we're going to be talking about how our state of Delaware is enticing businesses to incorporate here, and the benefits of that kind of a program and what they hope to achieve. We'll be right back.
Welcome to Wilmington, Delaware. At Preservation Initiatives, we bring beautiful lofts to you. The recently renovated lofts at 400 Market Street are a must-see, a part of registered National Historic District. Featuring spacious floor plans, custom glass windows, solid surface countertops, stainless steel appliances, custom lighting, wood flooring, large closets, pocket doors, sunny interiors, high ceilings plus beautifully detailed trim molding. Enjoy the sights, sounds, and tastes of Market Street. Just a short walk from the Wilmington riverfront, featuring family-friendly places to enjoy, with plenty of restaurants, entertainment, and other small-town conveniences. Wilmington, Delaware, in the middle of it all. Reserve today. Preservation Initiatives. Urban revitalization through historic preservation.
Preservation Initiatives is a wonderful, wonderful gem that we have here in the city of Wilmington. Don McGinley, its founder, has been developing historic properties since 1979. He's had properties in Boston, Miami, Philly, and now Wilmington. If you want to contact Preservation Initiatives in reference to any of the residential or commercial properties, please call them at 302-543-7565. That's 302-543-7565.
You can't. Do those magic words motivate you? Has anyone ever told you that you can't? You can't be an entrepreneur. You can't be a business owner. You don't have what it takes. How many successful businesses started without incorporating? I'm John Williams, the president of Inc. Now. For 39 years, Inc. Now has been incorporating first-time entrepreneurs just like you. Over 15,000 companies, from mom-and-pop businesses to worldwide enterprises. IncNow.com, based in Delaware, can have you incorporated in only a few minutes for $298. Inc. Now makes starting your LLC easy. Learn more about what Inc. Now can do for you. On the web, visit incnow.com. That's incnow.com. What do you have to lose? If you think you can't be an entrepreneur, then don't. I'm here to tell you, you can. Plant a seed. Inc. Now. Dreamers wanted.
You're listening to WFAI 1510 AM. Welcome back to this week's edition of Evolution Strategies, Business Sustainability and Growth Simplified. If you're just joining us, get your pen and paper ready for more free advice from Carolyn Lighty and her guests.
Well, good afternoon and welcome back. If you're just now joining us, I'm sitting here talking with John L. Williams. He's an attorney and also a president of Inc. Now. We're talking about the benefits of incorporation and why it's so important for you to set up your business legally in the state of Delaware. The state actually recently launched a campaign to entice businesses to incorporate in Delaware. We were talking a little bit about that, John. What do you think about that move? What is the catalyst behind it?
Thanks, Carolyn. As you may be familiar with, the Division of Corporations in Delaware is already has done a lot to try to attract business to Delaware, but it's never really had a website that was really user-friendly. It was more about just where are the forms, searching names, who are the registered agents, paying annual fees. But what it's tried to do is not just have like a big block of text of information or some long article. It's gone to more of like a blog format where it has articles written by people who are specialists. And it's interesting that they try to make it almost a little bit more like an e-commerce site that people are used to seeing so that it's more attractive. And the state has a major advantage in that because if you do a search for something like Delaware LLC, as a .gov website, if you're familiar with SEO, they show up right at the top of the search engine results. So usually one of the first sites that people see as they're doing research is that state site. And it's nice that they're a little bit more user-friendly now because it may help attract business to Delaware. And I don't think they're competing directly with registered agents that are also trying to provide similar content to people out there. But it's nice getting it from a .gov website because it tends to be more, thoroughly researched, more thoroughly edited, maybe a little bit more accurate. And as I was mentioning to you, Carolyn, before we started, the Delaware Supreme Court, which is one of the reasons people incorporate here is because of the court system. But the Chief Justice, we're getting a new Chief Justice soon. Steele is stepping down, and the governor's in the process of appointing a new Chief Justice. And I read an interview with Chief Justice Steele. He said a big job of the Chief Justice, almost half his job, is not deciding corporate cases and other cases. It's marketing. It's the roadshow. They literally go around the country. They go to all these around the world to all over these Eastern Europe. They go to the Far East to try to get people to educate people about the advantages of incorporating in Delaware, because we have this incredible. You wouldn't think this little state, sort of no one. If you asked people to name all 50 states, the one they usually forget is Delaware. But we have this amazing body of corporate law here that just makes it so advantageous that people from all over the world come here, and here we happen to be in this. In this capital of corporate law, and we just happen to be speaking from Wilmington, Delaware. So, as you're in Delaware, one nice thing about deciding about incorporating that you don't have to decide is where to incorporate, because it's really a no-brainer coming to Delaware.
Yeah. So is Delaware still the incorporation capital of the United? I'm going to say, I won't say world, but I'll say United States. Would you say it still has that ranking?
Delaware has more corporations and LLCs who are formed by non-residents than any other state. Some states actually have more, like I think Florida technically has more companies, but a lot of them are formed by people in Florida that happen to use to own boats or to own real estate or to run businesses as well. But there's so many boats in Florida that I think there are a lot of businesses formed there just to hold those assets.
Okay, that's interesting.
And they used to actually form boats in the corporations in Delaware. So you go to Florida and you see all Wilmington, Delaware on the back of all these boats. but that was mainly for tax reasons to avoid, because Delaware doesn't have a sales tax.
Right.
But I think what happened was in Florida they have another reciprocal of the tax called the use tax, and they basically have figured out a way to tax boats no matter where they're incorporated.
No matter where, yeah. It's always a way to find out how to sew up those loopholes. That's interesting. And so when we talk about that website, and I did take a look at the state website, is it being marketed more as a DIY, like a do-it-yourself kind of website? Is that it, basically?
It's so new, it's hard to tell exactly where they're going to go with this. I think they're still figuring out themselves. They tried to make it user-friendly, and they've tried to make it more like you would see from an e-commerce site. So, but it's not really a start-to-finish type website. If you read through it, there's links. There'll be links to sort of search your business name, see if your name's already being used by somebody else. That's usually the first question people have when they form a business. I've got a name. Is this name available? And so that's one thing you can do there. That's usually a first step. And they say, well, what's the next step? And they say, well, those are forms here you can fill out and submit the forms. Two things there is, like I said, with the corporation, not only for the nonprofits do their forms not have every provision that you may want or need. The corporation forms don't have every provision you're going to want or need. For example, our corporation forms talk about indemnifying officers and directors for certain types of liability, or having director amended bylaws, which sounds really technical, but they're things that you're going to want that aren't in the default state forms, and you only get it if you put it in your certificate. So if you use their website and just create something off their forms, you're also not going to get the internal documents, and that's really the most important part from my perspective, is that people overlook. And so I don't know what the state. It's not a start to finish solution. You can't just enter your credit card and they'll do everything for you. Mm-hmm. You still have to do a lot of homework, but they do make it a little bit easier. So for the do-it-yourselfer,
it looks more appealing. The user interface is much more appealing. They have a section where they talk about, debunking myths as it relates to incorporation. So I think that could probably be helpful, kind of like almost an FAQ kind of thing. It gives you definitions. So it begins, I think, to help to educate the business owner, but I think it still would make more sense to work with someone who does this every day rather than trying to do it yourself.
I would agree with that. In fact, when you talk about educating, this is part of what I was trying to allude to is that the state is a little bit more non-biased. I mean, they may be biased to the extent they want you to come to Delaware, but they're not trying to, say, hey, use our service over somebody else's, or they're not saying, they're, in other words, it's a government website. You expect them to be a little less biased, and maybe a little bit more reliable in terms of the content they put on there. So I haven't read through their website start to finish, but I have read some parts, and generally it's well written. So I'm glad they're doing that.
Yeah, I think it's a good step, a step in the right direction. So as we're getting close to the end of the show, we have like 10 minutes left. Let's talk a little bit about those resolutions. Let's start. I'm going to ask you first about your personal resolutions for 2014, John. What is it that you've decided to either give up or something that you've decided that you need to do in order to have a different kind of outlook by the end of 2014?
Thanks, Carolyn. What I would say is, we've got some business things where we've got a whole list of things. We're launching a new website. It's things that was supposed to be my 2013 resolution, and now it's a 2014 resolution.
Well, sometimes we need a little more time.
So I don't know if you all have websites and you're designing them, but it's quite a process. Yeah. But in any case, what I would say is just from a personal standpoint, the biggest thing I do is I wake up in the morning and first thing I do is I check my phone as sort of my wake up process. And usually it's just to check the time. And next thing you know, I'm checking my email or I'm checking Facebook or whatever it happens to be. Mm-hmm. And so you end up, the time just clicks away and clicks away. And I feel like the morning time for me is the most productive. Like if I'm working on a client matter or I like to get work done in the mornings, I like to work out in the mornings. Mm-hmm. And it feels like if I can basically get off my device for the first 4 or 5 hours of the day, I think, biologically, we're programmed not to be on these devices. This is something that's come along that we're not used to.
Of course.
And so I think it's very tempting to get on these devices, but it's part of my resolution is really just to put the device down.
Yeah, I think that they're going to have to launch one of those, either mobile device anonymous or something like that, because people are becoming addicted to the technology. And I've been seeing a lot of things written, various blogs are talking about it. I mean, and that's the wave of the future. 74% of all searches right now are being conducted on a mobile device. So people are turning more and more to these devices, and they're, beginning to almost rule our lives. So, and that's not necessarily a good thing. Yeah, you want to stay connected. You want to stay in touch. You want to see what's going on. But, having to check your Facebook every 10 minutes or your email every 15 minutes. And by the time you do all that, hours have gone by, and how much have you really accomplished?
Yeah, and I think speaking of launching the website and mobile devices, this is something that a little outside the scope of this hour, but one thing a lot of websites are trying to do now, instead of having a separate mobile site, they'll have like responsive sites, where it means like the website knows that you're coming in from a smaller browser, like a cell phone, right. And it automatically displays like sort of a stripped down version of your content. Mm-hmm. And it's a real trick to figure out what people want to use or see. It's almost like you're taking a book, which is your whole website, and trying to distill it down to a poem. Mm-hmm. And it's really from a business standpoint, it's hard to sort of get so much good stuff in that little space to the point where it's still as informational to the user and good for your business.
You're absolutely right. And there is a big difference. A lot of people don't recognize that because you can access your website on a mobile device doesn't mean it's mobile optimized. Because if you can move it and it kind of floats around the page like this, it floats around the screen, then it's not mobile optimized. It's just that they can access it, but then they're not able to see the whole page. You got to float over here, float over there. If it's optimized, you'll be able to tell instantly. And as you're saying, it's a little distilled down version.
Carolyn, I had a question about your resolutions. Why don't you tell me about your resolutions?
Oh, yeah. Who's interviewing here? Actually, what I've decided to do is more of the same. I'm really committed to helping small businesses. Or do you want to know the business side or the personal side? My personal side needs to be I had a health scare a couple of weeks ago, and so I'm going to pay attention to those warning signals a little bit more than I did this time. So I would encourage people to not ignore the signals of potential health issues and take care of yourselves a little bit better. I've always been someone that worked out and all of that, so we always every year recommit ourselves to working out and being healthy. But I think that listening to warning signals of your body is a good thing. On the business side, I'm going to be doing more and more. I have a lot of stakeholders that I've been meeting with here in the Wilmington area. And I'll be doing more and more to help some of the small businesses. And I think I'm finally getting some people on board that can help me from a financial standpoint to make that happen. So, in looking at some of the New Year's resolutions, I did some research. I looked at Huffington Post. I looked at Inc. magazine. I looked at a lot of different sites, and they all kind of are saying the same thing about what you might want to look forward to in terms of having a better year next year. The first is right up your bailiwick, John. It talks about filing all of your legal paperwork. So, whether it's LLC certificates, your EIN applications, trademarks. I mean, we hate forms, not to mention the fact that with the tax season coming and needing to be able to file our paperwork for that as well, which is one of our other things, getting your estimated tax payment in. You guys don't get involved necessarily with that aspect of it, but I'm sure you recommend to your clients that they need to be on top of both their legal and their tax issues in the first quarter.
Right. We don't get much involved with the estimated tax payments, but we do actually get involved in trademarks, which is almost be a topic for a whole nother separate show.
Yeah.
Well, that'll be my next invitation.
No,
here.
That's great because that is a big question. A lot of people come up with ideas, inventions that they don't know. Should I use a trademark? Should I use a service mark? Do I have to patent this? Those are all questions that a lot of people that I run into, have.
In a previous life, I was at Coca-Cola Corporation working in their patent legal department.
Oh, really?
Fountain beverage and bottling technology.
Well, cool then. I need to talk to you about some other things offline then. Let's see. Also, in terms of resolutions, you want to reanalyze your ROI. Go over your major operations of your business, figure out what products and services are actually providing an ROI to you. When it comes to your systems and hardware, stop fixing that. How old is that computer, and how many times have you had people come in to fix the same, problem with your network and so forth? So it might be time to make that investment on upgrading, and that may be a lot initially, but over the long haul, you're going to be saving money. You also want to analyze your customers' behavior, their buying behavior. If you're not looking at the trends going forward as it relates to mobile technology, you need to do that. You need to be wherever they're shopping, and you need to look at what their behavior is. How important are reviews to this customer based on whatever it is that you're selling? You need to involve yourself in social media. You need to refresh your websites. That's one of the things that John and I already talked about. You can't have a website that you first launched in 2005 and expect that you're going to be really reaping any major rewards or being returned in the top search results on the search engines. Very important also is sometimes we start a business and we've actually lost the passion for it. It's just become a job because we've gotten bogged down in the drudgery of it. So I would say examine and redefine perhaps your role as the president and owner of the business. Is this what I expected the dream to be? And what do I have to do maybe to change that? And finally, to take a look at your staff. I'm not talking about laying people off, but I'm saying look at ways that you can help improve their effectiveness to you as a business owner, improve their value to you, and improve your value to them. So those would be my suggestions, John. I'm going to give you the last word for the show, though, today, if there's anything that you'd like to add to that.
I was reading an article. Speaking of social media, there's a lot that you can learn about entrepreneurism just from following things on Twitter. There's about 100 blogs out there or more, probably. Yeah. And I've read some posts, and one was talking about profitability of your business, and it's something that's overlooked a lot of times by small businesses. So concerned about running the business and running that top line, they forget about the bottom line. And there's one thing that kind of sank in was the 90% done projects. You've invested a tremendous amount to get something 90% of the way, but you haven't quite finished it. Yeah. And getting those projects finished is really kind of a New Year's resolution that you could probably take hold of and try to just get things out the door and get things launched and get things finished. And because otherwise you've got all these sunk costs into things that you aren't even using.
Well, thank you very much for joining our show. John, you'll have to come back. There's a lot more we need to talk about. That'll be it for us today, and we'll